Hello again. Today we're going to look at chapter 4 of Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, entitled Integral Ecology. And this is kind of the bridge chapter in the encyclical. Some people would put it, more people probably with the 3 steps of see, judge, and act. We're still in the judgment. In other words, what does the scripture say? What does church tradition say? What's the judgment, the moral, ethical judgment on the problem we presented in chapter 1? What's happening with our common world? But basically it's fossil fuels and global poverty, But in this chapter, we're going to start to move into action steps, or at least looking at what can we do to have an integral ecology. First of all, it might be just a few clarifications. We use several words interchangeably, and there's subtle distinctions between ecology and environment. Ecology has to do with the relationship between organisms and the environment. And environment itself has to do with the relationship between nature and society. So one has to do more with the plants and animals, all the species, with the world around them, whereas environment has to do with that relationship of all those same organisms with society. In other words, that's where we come in. That's the little subtle distinction between those two terms. We also use the word systems. Now, systems, as I understand it, would refer to one species, all the members of that species, whereas the relationship between that species and all the other species is called an ecosystem. And that's very important. I'm sure you've all heard the term the food chain. We especially would talk about that in the oceans. One thing feeds off another, but that's true all throughout creation. Who are believers, would say, well, the Creator set it up that way. One thing depends on another. That's where he is driving home this idea that we're all interconnected as one common home. And there's a balance that we must have. I could give examples of that between the wolves and the antelope in Yellowstone. When they took out the wolves, the antelopes ate all the plants, and so they brought the wolves back. I mean, we get out of balance. So we lose 1,000 species, Francis says, every year. And so when we lose a species, it upsets that chain, that food chain, or the balance of nature, okay? And there's one other term we use, and that is sustainable. What does that mean? It means it's renewable or it's regenerative, with plants or animals, we would think about reproducing, continuing on. But it gets to a point sometimes where a species is not able to do that. It's threatened by something, and it goes into extinction. The last white male rhino died because of the poachers shooting it for their horn. Elephants are kind of in that same, for their tusks. And so if we intervene against nature, upset the balance, it brings about eventually extinctions. The natural environment and the social environment are interconnected very closely. So what happens with the environment affects society. And an example of that would be perhaps what's happening in some of the areas where I worked in Peru, not exactly the same area, but institutions or governments or states try to set up regulations or laws to protect against overuse or pollution. And there are some areas of the world, some countries, where there are very sparse regulations, and those then are open to exploitation, and that's what's happening in parts of the jungle of Peru. It's known as the Amazon. They're mining, gold mining, silver mining, copper mining, all of these move in, and they haven't much regulations, and so they exploit, they take out big resources, and they're polluting with the chemicals they use to do that, the water, and therefore the land, and that destroys something else that's even more precious, and that is the indigenous culture. And this is done for the same motive that drives all development, and that is profit. And when profit is the only motive, we've said this before, the environment really suffers. and there becomes kind of a disdain for laws and regulations. We hear this every day in the news, no? And it can become, I suppose, too much. But when those laws don't exist, people fill the vacuum. They begin to exploit, to use it for profit, even to the use of the human person. And we know this happens. We're hearing that the opioid crisis, which is killing more people than traffic accidents now in our country, was due in part because the drug people or the doctors were oversighting and giving out too many drugs. People were addicted to these things, and so now to heal that abuse is becoming very costly and very difficult. Another aspect of that, which we probably have touched on, is human trafficking. People actually selling other human beings for labor or for sexual favors. That's even more lucrative, we're told, because there are very little regulations, and so it's more lucrative. They can't be caught and prosecuted as easy as they can for drugs, which has filled up our jails, and now that's a problem, no? So all these things about having regulations, there might be a disdain for them, but they're also necessary, of course, again, within a certain balance, no? Now, the deterioration of the environment, I already touched on this, that has to do also with the deterioration of cultures, you know? And this is especially true with some of our indigenous populations, you know? Mining and deforestation for lumber move in, and they're looking for profits, of course, and the world needs these products. But when there are no regulations, the environment really suffers, and so do the cultures, the indigenous cultures especially. Now, Pope Francis was very much aware of this. Very recently, he visited the Amazon area of Brazil and Peru. He met those people. While he was there, he announced a summit of the leaders of the Amazon. I think it's called the Amazon Summit. It's coming up perhaps next year. And they want to deal with these problems that are being forced on them from the outside. They're losing their indigenous culture, their way of life, their environment, their air, water, and their land. And while he was there also, Pope Francis, well, when he came back, I should say, he named a cardinal from that area, an area that never had a cardinal before, one Cayo, or Arroyo, which is a mining area, but also there's part of this, what they call the selva, the jungle is included there. So this man will be a spokesman for the indigenous in that area, no? So we're talking here about integral ecology. In other words, the sum of all the ecological concerns. So if we want to talk about authentic development, we have to take into consideration the quality of people's lives. Because the development is only about profit, then the environment suffers, but also the other aspect of what Francis is talking about, along with the global and environmental problem, there is global poverty or global inequality, and that causes violence. He said that in his his previous writing, The Joy of the Gospel. Inequality leads to violence, and we must consider then the quality of people's lives in our cities. Here, this is a problem. We hear it all the time, but we don't have enough housing. People are paying half to 2/3 of their income for rents. Another aspect of it has transportation, which causes the emissions, which causes the global warming, the thickening of the atmosphere. So there is great concern and there's great interest in developing public transportation here in San Diego. Caltrans is trying to plan ahead and to get fewer cars in our highways, and that means that we have to spend and invert and plan for these things. It's very difficult. I know they've been fighting trying to get that fast rail from Sacramento to LA, and it's becoming tremendously expensive. Europe, I've traveled there. Trains are very efficient. They're very rather cheap. Same thing in Mexico City. Their subway system and their bus system. I took a bus once going to Puebla, Mexico, and so I thought, well, everything here's late. So I'm sitting there reading my book, and when I went over, they said, well, that thing, I left at 10 o'clock. That was the 10 o'clock bus that already left. Take the next one. I was amazed. It's very rapid, very efficient. When I was in Peru, almost everybody in the cities traveled by buses and what they call the minibuses. No, so that is another aspect in our cities, the quality of people's lives, the type of transportation, and how much of that we use. And that all has to do with what we call authentic development, a development which takes into consideration the quality of people's lives. No, we might look at ecology from the human aspect. What does that mean? Well, that the moral law has to be considered. We consider that the world was given to us as a gift. We have to protect that. If we give ourselves the right of total dominion over our bodies, that the Creator has nothing to do with it, it's our decision only, then we can do the same thing with creation. If we have absolute power over our bodies, we have absolute power over all the rest of creation. And that is a dangerous thought. No? What we're talking about here at the base level is the common good, or social ethics, the good of everyone. That's what common good means. Common good means, someone said, the greatest good for the greatest number of people. No? And that considers all the aspects of human life. No? The right to life, and then the quality of life from womb to tomb, as we say. Education, health care, a job which gives dignity, a dignified salary to get these things, but not in excess. Listening to the radio the other day, I heard that some CEOs in some of our large companies were given bonuses of between $15 and $28 million. That's bonus. That's not a salary. And that plays into that inequality that's developing. It's the unbalance. As we have talked about the unbalance in nature, there is another unbalance in our economic system. And also another aspect of this human development would be the future generations, what we call intergenerational solidarity. In other words, we are in solidarity with those who will follow us, our children and the next generation. What kind of a world are we leaving them, no, for the future? This is a justice issue. And so we can't talk about sustainable development without talking about intergenerational solidarity. In other words, looking to the future and protecting the interests of those who will follow us. No? In essence, what Pope Francis is saying is that our actual lifestyle is unsustainable. In other words, we cannot all live at the lifestyle that perhaps we in this country enjoy globally. So in the end, we're talking about Chapter 4, Integral Ecology. What is it? In essence, it's one that protects the environment, no? And the environment we defined is that all creation and its relationship to us, to society. You know? It's a better quality of life for all of creation. We must be concerned in working toward that. We might call it again the common good, the good of everyone and everything. It's sustainable, meaning it can reproduce itself, it can go on, no? And it's something that's not, if it's sustainable, it's not polluted, it's not wasted, it's not overstretched. So that, in essence, is what we would call then integral ecology, which is human ecology. No? Thank you.